Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guests are the team behind the comic book history of comics, action presidents, action philosophers, and the currently being Kickstarter the comic book history of animation. It's Fred Van Lente and Ryan Dunlavey. Thanks for coming on, guys.
Thanks for having us on. Hey, Fred, I get to talk.
See, this is what happens every time I have two guests on. It's always boom, right in the start. It's hilarious, though. I love it.
I know.
Well, I'm going to start
if only we'd taken the time to like sit in the same room together, we wouldn't have this problem. But we're flying blind here.
Are you guys near each other?
We're about a mile away from each other.
Oh, yeah. You guys have no excuse then.
We're lazy. I like my house.
It's the 11 a.m. start time is this excuse.
Hey, it's 7 a.m. in Alaska. So
I was going to say,
no, that's not a dig on you.
Oh, I know.
It's just practicality.
No, totally. Well, how's it going? You guys are 10 days into the Kickstarter?
Yeah, about.
It's going really well. Yeah, we're about 111% funded.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to get our first stretch goal. We're a distance from that, but not undoable. We want to add our buddy Adam Growski as colorist.
Gazowski,
excuse me.
How dare you?
I will now slink away. We want to
20 days to go still.
As a colorist because Ryan is an excellent colorist, but he is really slow.
Mm-hmm.
And adding manpower
kills me.
Would get it done much quicker.
Yeah,
I really just want to send you guys to Japan, to be honest. That's your ultimate stretch goal, and
we're really far away from that, but fingers crossed.
I know. The Ghibli Museum is fantastic.
My wife was not interested in this project at all until I said, "Oh, we'll go to Japan if we make this much." She's like, "Oh my God, let's do this." Now suddenly it's the number one thing on her agenda.
Well, we're gonna get to all this stuff, to your partnership and everything like that, but I do a lot of research in my prep for this, Ryan and Fred. And when I was going through Fred's social, or his Twitter, I came across something I have to ask about. It has literally nothing to do with anything.
Uh-oh.
Fred, your cat got like completely covered in catnip the other day.
Yes.
And it completely, like, I was looking at it in bed and I showed it to my wife. We have two cats. And she's like, "What happened to that cat? Is that cat okay? Did he overdose?" And like, it was like the most hilarious thing. I just saw it and just started laughing hysterically because I couldn't believe what I was looking at.
I'll send you the photo so you can like post it on the.
Oh no, I'll get it for sure. But
okay, good.
I have to ask, what was the reaction by the cat?
What happened was my lovely neighbor Beth across the hall, her cat passed away at like age 20 or 21. Like, this was an ancient cat.
Mm-hmm.
You'd pet it. It was basically a cat skeleton with like fur draped over it. And when you pet it, you just feel its vertebrae. God bless that wonderful cat. But he's gone now. And so she gave me and Crystal, my wife, the litter and like a scratching post and this little baggie of catnip. And it was like the middle of a Saturday, like my cat was nowhere to be seen, so I just put the scratching post down, and then I, like sometimes what you do with scratching posts or scratching mats, you sort of sprinkle with catnip to make it more attractive.
Yeah,
and so I did that, and then I started playing video games. Of like the couch is right over, and then like the cat's nowhere to be seen, and then suddenly I see movement at the bottom of my vision. I was like, "Oh, the cat's there," and I look over, and I must have left the baggie on the floor of catnip.
Oh my God!
After sprinkling the scratching post, and it was just it was like someone had dropped an oregano bomb. He was just covered in it, and I immediately started snapping photos. The one I posted was the funniest one. And he's just rolling around, and he's just literally covered from head to toe in catnip. And then he's crawling over the coffee table and on me and covering everything in catnip. And I was just like laughing my ass off / yelling at him because that took a while to clean up.
Yeah.
That was literally he was making snow angels in catnip. It was crazy.
It's true what they said. Video games do lead to drug use.
My cat would basically be like Kevin Bacon in Flashdance and like punch dancing in a wooded glen if that happened, because he just goes apeshit if he gets in the catnip. Even a little bit, but like that much. Woo!
Flashdance.
Is it Flashdance?
Footloose.
Footloose, my bad. Oh god, I mixed up my F's.
Same thing.
I'm sorry. Well, okay.
We're from the 80s, so we're real sensitive about Kevin Bacon's.
Well, I'm really looking forward to when you guys do the comic book history of dance movies that Kevin Bacon starred in. Now that might be the angle to go with.
That sounds awesome. I hope you find somebody to try.
So
we're gonna triple our Kickstarter ask. It's gonna be amazing.
Well, let's jump into the to the good stuff. I want to start with, because you guys have been working together for Action Philosopher seemingly started in 2003. So you've been working together for a long time. So Ryan, I'm going to task you with this one. I want to know your meet cute. How did you guys get together?
We met in college in a geeky comic book club called Comics Plus. We both went to Syracuse University, and I was dragged there by a classmate. We didn't have any who was also into comic books, and we didn't have any. I was studying illustration, and you didn't have any comic book making classes. And she was like, "Oh my God, I met all these crazy people that are making comic books every semester just for fun." So I went, and I loved it. And then Fred was a member there too, but he wisely couldn't draw, and he wisely teamed up with Steve Ellis, who you may have heard of. Mm-hmm. And he was my roommate at the time. And
weirdly, Syracuse had no undergraduate writing program. It's funny you said they had no undergraduate comic drawing program. They had no undergraduate writing program either. So it was like pieces. It was like, you got your, frustrated comic artist into my frustrated writer.
Yeah. And we were also taking, and also wanting to do comics as an illustration major, I took all my electives as writing classes too. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm Fred, I think you were probably had some of the same teachers, but we never had classes together. But yeah, that was it. A couple years later, we never worked on comics together in college. I was always wanted to be an auteur, writing and drawing all my own stuff. And a couple years later, we ended up as roommates in New York City at the same time. And again, for years and years, we worked on projects together, but we never did it where Fred was the writer and I was the artist. Eventually,
a game called Superpowers.
Yeah, that's right. And we did a couple
cult hit.
Yeah, mm-hmm. And we did a couple video game projects at some point. With Steve was sort of the linchpin of that. Steve Ellis was also our roommate.
By far the most successful member of our group.
Mm. Yeah, or early on.
The listeners here, he did a webcomic called High Moon. He does a comic right now called The Only Living Boy. So he's definitely still
he drew a Spider-Woman series while we were still in college too.
Wow.
Right. Iron Man.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, he was a successful
superhero Secret Wars version of Spider-Woman.
Oh yeah, with the black costume and the red hair.
Yes, that's how that was.
Let me think. What else? But then around 2002 or so, comics. I was making a living, as a graphic artist and illustrator, but the comics thing wasn't taking off. And my wife very wisely said to me, she's like, you're drawing stuff at a professional level, but your writing sucks. Why did you try working with a writer? And the first thing.
What year did you get married?
I know. Well, you've met her. She's
What year did you get married?
2002. Yeah. But we'd been together for 4 years before that. And then, she was, and it just on her suggestion, she's like, go find a writer to work with. And it ended up being Fred. I actually approached his wife, Crystal, originally to do a comic together. Mm. But then I had an opportunity to do this. It was for the Small Press Expo. They used to do an anthology comic. And Fred and I had both been trying to get in separately for years. He was doing comics with Steve. I was doing writing and drawing my own stuff. And we were always getting rejected. And so we teamed up this year to do the Friedrich Nietzsche comic because it was all biographies.
But
we got rejected there too.
But first, you wanted to do that story about the cosmonaut.
Oh yeah, I had that's a long story.
Wait, Yuri Gagarin or somebody else?
No, Alexei Leonov.
Okay.
Because I'd just gone. My brother lived in D.C. and I'd been huge into space exploration as a kid. Mm-hmm. And I used to go to the Air and Space Museum all the time. And my brother had moved there. I'd just gone back to D.C. for the first time and seen the Air and Space Museum for the first time. And I saw this great display of Alexei Leonov's spacesuit. He's the first guy to walk in space. Mm-hmm. And you go down at the bottom of it, and it's not there anymore, but there used to be this, there was his art supplies mm-hmm. that he brought into space.
Oh.
Because the legend goes that he was an artist also. He was a very accomplished painter after he retired. The legend goes that he wasn't able to take the camera out of the capsule when he walked in space. So he had to draw the sunrise from space. And the drawing's there. You can look it up online. It's amazing. And when I saw it, I just started, I like had this huge emotional cathartic moment. And it was just like, my two loves of like space stuff when I was a kid and like art stuff as an adult were like colliding in a moment of history I was learning right there. And I started tearing up right in the museum. And I tell this to Fred. I was like, let's do this comic. And he was like, nah, let's do a comic on Friedrich Nietzsche.
Okay, I need to break in here because the first time I ever heard this cosmonaut story was last week when we were in the New York City Department of Education.
Well, yeah, I wasn't.
I remember that slightly differently. I don't think you told me, and I talked to Crystal about this when I got home. And I was like, Ryan publicly said that I crushed his dreams about doing a cosmonaut comic in the middle of the Paley Center in New York City.
It's true.
And she was like, I don't remember the cosmonaut thing. She was going to try and make you do a comic about there's an African-American sculptor whose name is Lee, who's sort of quote-unquote outsider artist who does these like elaborate statues, like kind of like in the style of headstones. But then I was like, no, Crystal, I want to do comics. You don't care.
Wow. I don't remember the sculptor at all, but I remember there was also Phineas Gage was what I first came to Crystal with. She was doing a play on that.
She and I don't remember the cosmonaut. You don't remember the sculptor. I also wanted to point out that you had a lot of nice photos in your presentation, and the cosmonaut's drawings were entirely in color, and this was a black and white comic. So. But
I wasn't going to draw. It was the story of him, making the artwork in space, and the fact that I don't know. I just thought it was cool. They sent an artist in space because they couldn't bring a camera.
I think that's cool. That is awesome. Really cool.
So it's like Harvey Weinstein's trial. It's like Harvey Weinstein's trial. Sure. But
Fred, I did it. I threw you under the bus just for a good laugh.
You don't.
That's really the point.
Arch and everything. Jeez.
That's your guys' meet cute. That's how you guys got together. But I am curious, like, it's funny because every single person you're saying is obviously it's like a historical figure. And I do think it's funny that you guys have become like, I'm air quoting over here, history guys. I mean, that might have been the situation for the SPX anthology you guys were talking about. And so it was like right time and place. But how did that become your guys' your thing? It's kind of like your niche at this point, and you own it, and you've done it for so long because you did philosophers or action philosophers, you did action presidents, you did comic book history of comics, you just did action activists. So it's like you have this like I don't know this one area that you guys own. How Fred, how did that become your guys' thing?
Well, to a certain extent, that's SPX's fault because the theme of the anthology was biography.
Okay, there you go.
I mean, I've always been interested in history, and the whole point of the Nietzsche comic the gag was it was going to be like a He-Man and the Masters of the Universe little mini comic you got with the action figure, except this was for your Nietzsche action figure, hence the name Action Philosophers.
Right.
And we did it and got rejected, and I kind of forgot about it, but Ryan was very persistent, and he sort of was showing it to places, and we ended up with this startup comic book newspaper that was sort of going to be trying to be like the Onion and be like in various free places called Prophecy, right?
Prophecy, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think some other names people would be familiar with were in there. So they commissioned the guy who edited Prophecy was a former philosophy major. And so he commissioned the next two from us, and I wrote them and Ryan did them, but then Prophecy went out of business. Like the company collapsed before a single issue came out.
Wow.
Of the comic.
Yeah.
But we had an entire comic book's worth of philosophy comics, and we went around to various publishers like Alternative and Top Shelf and so on, and everyone rejected us. Mm-hmm. But Chris Staros at Top Shelf encouraged us to apply for the Xeric grant, which was the self-publishing grant that Peter Laird set aside some of his Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle bucks for. Mm-hmm. Sadly, the Xeric is no longer with us. The Xeric Foundation also sort of supports nonprofits in Massachusetts. I think they've So
they still exist. They just don't.
They absolutely
give
still
out
exist.
self-publishing grants.
Yeah,
Yes.
it used to be this weird. We support arts organizations in Massachusetts and self-published comic books, all around the world.
Yeah.
They sort of got rid of one half, and now they just do the Massachusetts side of it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so we self-published those stories that were already done as Action Philosophers #1, and we sort of thought like, oh, we'll just peter out, do a couple issues, and then we'll sell it to a book publisher or something. But yeah, we ended up being surprisingly successful, and we just pumped all the money we made off the issues back into the comic. We paid ourselves a little bit. We made some money off trade paperbacks and stuff. But yeah, we lasted 9 issues with that.
Yeah. I feel like Action Philosophers is the type of comic that if you maybe I feel like The Good Place kind of primed the pump a little bit for you guys. Like maybe there'd be more interest. I'm not saying it wasn't popular then or people didn't like it then, but I feel like if you guys like started pushing the trade again to like Good Place fans, maybe they'd be into it. Because I was like reading it the other night again, and I was just like, man, like I feel like a lot of these names are a lot more familiar now because I'm like I just watched all of The Good Place. I don't know, it's kind of random, but. Well, I did want to, because you have like a variety of subjects, and you guys are doing.
William Jackson Harper, who plays Chidi, has been in a couple of my wife's readings when he was a stage guy here in New York.
Oh, really?
That was sort of a double sort of weirdness for me, was to see those names and that philosophy come out of his mouth, because I was on the stage over here. That's
awesome. Well, I did want to talk about the subjects you guys tackle, because you're doing animation now. You guys are both fans of that. Sure. You've had a variety of subjects you've tackled. I have to imagine there's like a particular lean from one of you, or maybe not. I mean, when you're coming up with which subjects you want to approach, the projects you want to take on, do they ever like favor one of your perspectives over the other, or is it really like you guys just find something that you both are going to want to work on, whether that's Nietzsche or it's Walt Disney?
Well, we haven't done Action Cosmonauts yet, so we know.
That day will come.
It'll happen. I definitely think, Fred kind of drives the bus with in that regard about but Fred is interested in all sorts of things. So he's not just going to show. He just wrote a comic book history of basketball.
What?
And which is going to be coming out in the fall. And I didn't draw it, and I would have been the worst person to draw that book. But I mean, all these other ones that we've done together, it's the right match. Fred is really good at writing to the artist, if he knows who the artist is, if you've seen any of his other work. I think he's, doing even something that I, on the outside, wouldn't have been that interested in, like when we did the President's books. It worked. It fit. And, I've had a lot of enthusiasm for the stuff he wants to do. This was a no-brainer. The animation thing was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
I will say,
I'm a bigger fan than he is.
Ryan is definitely the person with the animation interest of the two of us.
Well, I was reading an interview you guys did with WMQ Comics, and I think you guys were asked like, talk about some of your like favorite like animation things, and Ryan, your answer was basically like, well,
it was an encyclopedia. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I loved it. It was hilarious because I was just like, well, it's pretty obvious that Ryan's feeling this one.
Yeah. Like, most people will be like, oh yeah, Frozen was neat, and that's the end of the answer. And I'm like, oh no.
Oh man,
buckle in.
I am right there with you, because I am like, it's I don't know, it's really funny. This is a horrible story. You're speaking of Frozen. I love animation. I go out of my way to see all kinds of animated movies. My cat is literally named Kubo after Kubo and the Two Strings.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually went, like, my wife didn't want to see Frozen. She had zero interest in it, and so I went and saw Frozen myself on a day off, and I'm pretty sure I somehow went to like a mothers only showing. And it was just all these moms and their children, and it was me sitting in the middle of them. And I was like, I have to seem like the creepiest person that has ever existed. And I'm just like sitting there and I'm like, this is really nice. I'm enjoying this movie.
Yeah. Or second daddy material.
I'm like,
that wedding ring, dude. I feel like you missed an opportunity.
Sorry, Amber.
Pulling an About a Boy situation. Like, he just couldn't make it. My son couldn't come.
Well, I am interested, like, so you guys have been working together for a long time, obviously, and I imagine over that time, Ryan, you mentioned the fact that Fred has gotten he's good at tailoring what he's writing towards the artist. But I am interested in how your working relationship has like evolved over the years, like especially considering the fact that if I imagine if you just told a person like, "Oh, I make history comics," that would be, well, first off, that'd be like the world's worst marketing ever because it's like the least sexy statement that's ever existed. But your guys' comics are super fun. How do you? I'm interested in trying to make history stories pop without losing the core of the story, like combating what could be dry ideas otherwise. What's your approach with that? Because like, you know, you look at a comic book history of animation, like some of the stuff you guys do in it, like making, you know, the representing the various real people throughout history, like, you know, Thomas Edison as an octopus, which I'm going to get into later. You know, like, how do you do that? Like, is it just totally situational? It's like it just you guys rapping together and trying to figure out what the right answer is? What's the approach?
I mean, I spent a good year of reading. On this subject before the Kickstarter even started. So
okay,
the first step is just sort of learn as much as you possibly can. I'm sort of mildly interested in animation, but I read a lot up on it, and so I was able to learn a lot. And so I think one of the exciting things, I mean, like just to take Action Philosophers as one example, I sort of read Nietzsche and I sort of read Plato and I sort of knew this other stuff, but I didn't know anything about like, you know, Leibniz or Spinoza or Kierkegaard or any of those guys. So a lot of times it's made easier simply by the fact that I'm completely ignorant when I start. So I don't have a lot of like knowledge kind of rattling around in my brain. Like I'm a little scared to go on like a press tour for the basketball book because I enjoy the NBA. I live down the street from the Brooklyn Nets stadium, so I try to go 2 or 3 times a year, but I'm not a super fan. And sports fanaticism makes, you know, superhero and comic book fanaticism look like, you know, amateur hour.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those guys all have, and they also have numbers rattling around in their heads, and numbers my entire life have made me go into like flop sweat, like panic. So I'm mildly terrified I'm going to totally humiliate myself on some sports podcast in the fall. We'll see how that goes. But animation, no problem. Because frankly, animation's a very, it turns out to be a very esoteric subject. There's not a lot of books about it.
Mm-hmm.
So thing has actually been relatively simple because there's just not that much out there. You know, there's a ton of books about Walt Disney, obviously. There's a great book, a John Kamaker book about Winsor McCay. That's this beautiful, coffee table book that you can find at the main library on Bryant Park in Manhattan with the lions in front and everything. You know, the Ghostbusters library.
Yeah.
And I just a great book called Drawing the Line about labor struggles in animation. A woman by the name of Talia Holt wrote a book called The Queens of Animation about the women who work at Disney. And which is a great sort of like, because all the books about Disney, unsurprisingly, tend to be at Walt. But her book is very much sort of you're in the trenches with the women actually doing the work book. So that's really terrific. So, and then at a certain point, the animal thing came about kind of organically because in the I don't remember why, because you said on the podcast we just did, right? You said that the idea of drawing Disney as Mickey Mouse you just kind of did it randomly on.
We didn't do it randomly. We had planned that originally.
I don't remember.
I think that was your idea to do it. You're saying like, well, we can't draw Mickey Mouse, but if you give him Walt Disney's creepy face, we can get away with it.
That's right.
And also, it was just sort of the pushback of, I just drew finished drawing Action Presidents, which is 400 plus pages of mostly old white guys in suits.
Yeah.
And you can only, and there's, you know, if you look at the history of arts and it's dominated by old white men in suits. So it's like, let's make it a little more interesting. And yeah.
Well, so, making Thomas Edison a squid is definitely a way to do that.
Yeah. Well, that's Fred, you know, that was his idea because, which I didn't know that Thomas Edison was deaf and that, so that was one of the reasons why he was.
And so are squids.
Oh,
squids famously have no hearing apparatus.
I had, honestly, like when I saw that he was a squid, I'm like, because you described him in the Kickstarter as aggressive multitaskers, and that's the reason why and I was like,
well, that too, it also fits.
I honestly, like, I read it and I was just like, I don't know if this is like subtle slander to Thomas Edison or if this is like legitimately why he's a squid. I wasn't sure because, Thomas Edison has a very interesting position in history where,
Yes.
the Tesla heads out there are not overly fond of the guy.
Correct.
And there are many. They are legion. But,
that's the Stan Lee of invention.
That is a absolutely perfect analogy. And now, a quick word from our sponsor. I want to take a quick second to give a shout out to my friends at TKO Studios. TKO is a new comics publisher doing things a little differently, with each of their titles being binge released in trade paperback and 6-issue collector's box sets at the same time. Their second wave of comics dropped recently, including one of my comics of the year in Jeff Lemire and Gabriel Hernandez Walta's Sentient, Roxane Gay and Ming Doyle's The Banks, and more, as well as gems from their first wave, like Garth Ennis and Steve Epting's remarkable war story, Sarah. Each is available now at tkopresents.com in trade, single-issue box sets, and digital release. Want to check these comics out before you order? Well, I have great news for you. If you visit tkopresents.com, you can read the first issues of each title for free right now. If you like what you read and you're a retailer, reach out directly to them at sales@tkopresents.com or go to tkopresents.com/vendors to order. TKO offers a 50% order discount as well as free shipping in the United States, a deal that's pretty hard to beat. Just a reader? That's cool too. You can order whichever comics you like directly off their site as well. Visit tkopresents.com to learn more today. And now, back to the show. Well, let's get into the comic book history of animation in full. It's your current Kickstarter. To steal the line off of your Kickstarter, it tells the story of the triumphs and tragedies of the filmmakers and beloved characters of the past century and a half. I am interested. It sounds like it's more going to be about the history of how this all happened, like the origins of you read the first 7 pages and it's you're like learning origins of animation itself, and you're going into process and reading some of the stuff I was coming across from you guys online. Like Fred, you're doing those tweet threads where you're talking about figures that people might not know about, and like connecting people to these figures that have been instrumental to the rise of animation, and people have no idea. So why was that your focus? Why did you want to get into the, I guess it's in the name, but like, why did you want to tell the history of animation in this way?
Well, action philosophers, again, it's so funny how that one SPX story sort of set the model for the first decade of our careers, because initially, the action philosophers and then comic book history of comics was done in short story format. So each single floppy comic book would have like 2, 3, 4 stories in it. Right. Then we ended up doing Action Presidents, which when we initially pitched it to HarperCollins was kind of like the exact same thing as Action Philosophers, where everything would be kind of random and we do all the presidents
we do every president in 20 pages.
Yeah,
was the idea?
Originally, but it'll all be themed. Like, was John Tyler actually poisoned, as many people thought he was? Was the guy who preceded Lincoln, whose name I'm blanking on, James Buchanan, was he gay? Supposedly James Buchanan was gay. Like, well, let's look into all this stuff, And HarperCollins came back and said, "We love you guys and we love what you're doing, but we want you to do instead biographies of the A-list presidents, none of this Chester Arthur nonsense."
Poor Chester Arthur.
I love Chester Arthur. I could just talk about him forever, but they're like, nope, we want Washington Lincoln. They wanted Washington Lincoln, FDR, and JFK.
Kennedy.
Okay.
Yeah. And JFK, we're like, kids don't care. But it turns out HarperCollins publishes all JFK's books, so clearly they're like, seeing some synergy here, corporate synergy.
Sure.
So
we did manage to convince them to do Teddy Roosevelt instead of Franklin Roosevelt. That was our one.
Well, he was a man of horses, so he's a lot more interesting.
I was really trying to
fits the title.
JFK, but we lost that battle. But the JFK book is terrific, and Ryan, you said that that's your favorite one. So.
Yeah, it ended up being my favorite of all of them. I think I'm pretty proud of it. I can't wait for people to see that one.
But I think for animation, I was certainly excited to do the history of an idea as if it was a person, or that a medium as if it was a person. So take that the long form stories and novels we were doing with the Action Presidents and apply that to our pop culture stuff. That's sort of what's been exciting to me.
That is really interesting. And Ryan, like, I am curious, like, the 5 issues that you have laid out on the Kickstarter are Silent but Deadly, funny, USA 1900 to 1927, Looney Studios, USA 1928 to 1940. Third issue is Worldwide of Toons, The World, which is 1908 to 1984, broad range.
Yeah.
Saturday Morning Funhouse, USA 1958 to 1990, and then Modern Times CGI Sensations, The World, 1990 to today. I mean, I'm curious, Ryan, like, about how you tried to, if you tried to guide it at all, because no offense, Fred, but Ryan is like the super passionate one about this. It's clear reading his stuff or reading that write up that, like, you're not just like you love animation all forms. You were referencing movies like Summer Wars, which is by Mamoru Hosoda, who is like, honestly, like, in my opinion, one of like the greatest animation directors ever. Like, he is unbelievable.
Oh yeah. Fantastic.
So how did you guys decide to split those eras and which ones you wanted to focus on? Because, I wouldn't, like, if you were trying to go the commercial route, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody would lean more towards the present time, but it seems like you guys really want to get into the roots of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Fred is the one who's figured this out. As much as I love animation, I hate research. And so I'm more than happy to let him take the lead, even though I knew a lot about this stuff. And he just sort of said, "Oh, well, let's break it down." I think it was originally 4 issues.
Oh,
and then as he goes, things evolve as you work on.
I think at one point I thought it was going to be 4, but then it went back to 5 again.
Went back to 5, and he just sent it to him. He sends me stuff and ideas as we work on them, and I just say, "Yep, that looks good."
Sure.
If anything had jumped out at me, I would have said, "Well, maybe we should think about it this way." I don't know, Fred. Have I brought stuff to your attention that you didn't come across in your research, or I can't recall?
We were just texting early before this interview that I'm going to go over to your house and raid your animation.
Oh yeah.
Because you have some stuff. Because I basically researched pretty well through the war, and I've done some stuff post-war, but it definitely could be beefed up a bit. So as we're sort of gearing up, I'm also way ahead of Ryan at this point in scripting versus where he is in.
I'm only halfway through the first issue, and he's. I've got the lettering
done of scripts
too.
And these comics are also really long. That's something we try to emphasize, like, in terms of floppies. Like, these are not 20 pages; they're 24, 25, 26 pages. So it's a lot more sort of. I mean, also that outline. Full disclosure for people doing Kickstarter, that outline's a guess.
Okay.
Because the book's not written yet. In fact, I ended the second issue much earlier than I thought I was, so I may have to totally rethink the middle part of the book. But
no more pages to draw.
Well, no. It's going to be the same number of pages, but what's in it may be.
Yeah.
I think that the world. Also, it's like the I mean, to be blunt, Disney so utterly dominated both not just American but world animation. Like, I think some of the Disney stuff is going to end up pushing out some of the more international stuff, I'm afraid. Apologies, Argentina.
Yeah.
You'll be mentioned. Don't worry. I won't forget about you. But lots of angry letters from France being like, "Why didn't you talk more about us?" Well, sorry, ran out of runway.
Yeah, I mean that's the tricky thing is like you're saying, it's like Walt Disney's influence was like so significant. I mean, you look at like the key figures in animation, and like you have your like Walt Disney. I mean, even like somebody, you look at all like the connections between people, and you look at like who's the number one person that John Lasseter probably pushes in terms of like influence. It's like Hayao Miyazaki actually, and.
What? Yeah.
And so it's like all these different figures like play off of each other. And it's if you don't have all that depth in there, probably for like Disney, then it's kind of like a house of cards. It's like it could crumble because you don't have that connection. Not that you're not going to have a lot of Disney in there anyways, but it's kind of necessary for telling that story in full.
Well, and also because the skills in animation required in animation, even in the film industry, are extremely specialized. It's so incestuous. It makes the comic book industry look like this open, wide open market. I mean, Ub Iwerks, who was Disney's partner, got mad at Walt and quit, and then formed his own studio where Chuck Jones was, and then he met his wife there. Chuck Jones's wife was Ub Iwerks' secretary, but then he ended up at Warner Brothers, and then at MGM. Cho, now I'm going to get a lawsuit. One of the Hanna-Barbera partners was sort of notoriously handsy. And so Mary Blair, who's one of the best Disney artists, was sick of putting up with his nonsense and sort of went to Disney, where she was one of the big character designers for Dumbo. In fact, there's a very famous sequence in Dumbo where Dumbo's gone up to his mother, and because after the mom's gone nuts, and they've closed her up in the cage, and the mother sticking her trunk through the bars and start caressing Dumbo, and I forget the name of the song that's playing over. It's Baby Mine, actually. It's the Baby Mine sequence. Mm-hmm. Mary Blair just had a miscarriage, and so she was drawing that design secrets right after having come back to work after having miscarried, and so she poured a lot of that intensity of those feelings into that sequence, and it's one of the more lovely in Disney history. And so it's all these great stories where all this stuff sort of interconnects, and it's very much sort of the feeling of comic book history of comics, where it was exciting to show how all these things interconnect, because geeks tend to be very specialized. Like all I care about is Batman or Mad Magazine or R. Crumb or horror comics or whatever my kink is.
Right.
But they show how all these things actually influence each other, and that's what's super exciting to tell these stories.
Yeah, it is really cool. I do think it's funny too that when I was researching this, I was rereading Comic Book History of Comics, and there's the part in the first issue where you talk about Max Fleischer and talk about the creation of the technology that he was just like, one day his boss told him, like, do this thing. You like doing this, and then he like figures it out. I mean, I do think you're talking about interconnectivity, and it's interesting how, because you guys are the quote unquote history guys again, there is like an interconnectivity between some of your texts because of that. There's like an overlap between the stories that you're telling, because the story of comics and the story of animation do have influence. I mean, hell, look at who's one of the biggest influences in the history of comics, Alex Toth, and he was a Hanna-Barbera guy.
Yep.
Walt Kelly started out at Disney and left during the big strike, and then he's invented Pogo, which started out as a comic book, but then became this incredibly successful comic strip.
Yeah. I don't think people think of that interconnectivity, which makes it really interesting, because there's a lot of conversation between animation and comic art. I mean, you see that with like the people who kind of swing back and forth between those. I mean, you have like right now, I can think of probably 5 or 10 people who are working in animation that started in comics, at least.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah. There's a number of them.
Yeah. Well, I did want to ask about one thing, and obviously, like, again, like this list is tentative. One inclusion in the breakdown, Fred, that I thought was really interesting was in issue 5, CGI Sensations, and you included Jurassic Park and CGI in there. Is so? I'm curious where like live action with computer animation elements would play a part. Is that something you're going to be looking at a bit?
Well, all early animation had live action elements.
Yeah, that's true.
Combination of live, and of course, what was the most famous early silent cartoon was Winsor McKay's Gertie the Dinosaur, where McKay, he did it at first as part of his stage act, where he was actually standing on stage doing his chalk talking act, and he was interacting with an animated dinosaur, right? So animation started innovating with live action people interacting with dinosaurs, so it makes a very natural leap, almost as a bookend, then to go to Jurassic Park.
Yeah, that's true.
And a lot of that technology that was used in Pixar and has been used in CGI films was developed for Jurassic Park initially.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously Pixar had still been around for some time before that, but a lot of the innovations, I mean, came from Jurassic Park. I mean, unfortunately, I would love to get into stop motion, but with that we absolutely don't have room for. So as stop motion, sorry, Bang fans, sorry, Fantastic Mr. Fox fans, we're pushing that. Stop motion's has to go stand over there.
Oh, so that gets like really noisy, because then you get to like Ray Harryhausen, and like that's not really animation, but it's at the same time it has like some of the elements that you're talking about. Yeah, no, it is interesting how like the tendrils can spread so easily without you really thinking about it. I hadn't even connected it back to like the animation early on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I am curious about like, so you said you're halfway through the first issue, Ryan. Like, what is your process for a project like this? Because Fred is like currently overdosing on research. He's like ingesting that as food.
Absolutely.
And then
I do it.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, well, I do it a little bit untraditionally, where I actually do the lettering first before I draw anything.
You're blowing my mind right now.
I take Fred's script and I have the templates and of the pages, and I copy and paste all the lettering because they are pretty wordy, and I don't want to draw more than I need to. It's not a knock. It's just the way it is. And and then I do the layouts, and then I actually get it to a point where it's a readable comic in almost in like a rough pencil form with full lettering.
We fought interminably over the font size on this one.
Oh my God. Every single project I fight about the size of the font.
Not always me though.
Yeah. Sometimes it's with editors. I'm just like, oh, but I always want it smaller than everybody else does. But
is that because like density of information?
The density of the information. Also, I got to like cram drawings into the tiny little spots. Otherwise we got to go back and forth and say, well, we got to cut down this text, and I'd rather just leave the text as is rather than do copy editing. Yeah, because that takes longer. But yeah, it's really a speed thing and a composition thing. It helps me compose the page better. So I'll do that. And then once that's done, if everybody, gives a thumbs up, I can literally just go right to final art. And I'm doing it all digitally also. I've been drawing digitally for about 10 years now, exclusively. I do sketches and I'll do layouts. Actually, the very first thing that happens before that, though, Fred sends me a full script, and I print it out on paper and I scribble all my layouts right there on the script itself. And I carry that around with me until it's done, and then I'll go to the computer and like put in all the lettering and start roughing in the drawings. And I can jump between the lettering and Photoshop where I'm drawing it and adjust on the fly. Change the shape of the balloons, change the shape of the caption.
Scripts is the highest level of pledging on the Kickstarter, and they went on Monday.
Yeah, right.
I thought that was a really smart Kickstarter reward.
And now I can't do my most satisfying part of any project I do with Fred, throwing the script in the trash. When I'm done with it. I have to hang on. Get out of here.
Be gone, demon.
That's hilarious. I love the idea. When you first said that you were doing lettering first, I was like, this guy's a wild man. What the hell is he talking about? But then when you start explaining it, it actually makes a lot of sense because with the density of information you're having to deal with, you have to like figure out what kind of real estate you have to work with before you can start drawing it.
And when it's a third of the page, that's a third of the page I don't have to draw.
Right.
I can just leave, a very simple space behind it or nothing at all.
EC Comics famously did that.
Yeah.
They actually did the lettering first and put it right on the boards, and then Jack Davis and everybody would just draw around it.
I think the Mad Magazine movie parodies did that too, where they just send the lettering and all the gags to the artist, and it would just be a blank page, and they'd have to figure out how to do it, how to put everybody in.
Is that something you guys have always done? Because Fred, you lettered Action Philosophers, right? Like, is that something that was always part of your process?
And he did Comic Book History of Comics.
Oh,
too. I think it started with Action Presidents, and I can't remember exactly how it started, but that's what we ended up doing. Right. I think in the middle of Comic Book History
down the stairs, and while I was recovering,
oh no, you're injured. I must letter it myself.
You weren't so clumsy.
I think what was happening is like towards the end of Action Philosophers and well into Comic Book History of Comics, I was tweaking the lettering a lot after Fred was sending it to me just for composition reasons. And finally, I'm just taking it over. I'm just going to do it all.
And you pushed me down the stairs.
Yeah, that too. But that was unrelated,
It's like Misery, except for like you guys are actually friends.
That's right.
It's so nice.
Associates,
yeah.
All right, I want to ask more about the animals you guys went with, because I find that whole thing to be really fascinating. Like I want to know what the process was like for that, and I don't know how far into that you are, and I don't know if this is purely one of you guys, but I have this idea in my head that you basically have like a Google sheet out there with like a whole ton of names, and you're like, I got it, squid, I got it, Mighty Mouse, et cetera, et cetera. Like, do you guys like just get together with like coffee or beer and just like throw out ideas, or how do you develop those?
Well, the first one, Fred. Yeah, Fred told me. They're on the first page of the script.
But for most of them, they're pretty obvious. Like,
sure.
Yeah.
Because rare is it that usually we just associate the character with the person's most famous creation. So Walt Disney obviously is Mickey Mouse, but we can sort of do a mouse thing, AU mouse, where very early in his career, Disney was really good at driving people crazy and making them want to betray him. So like he kept losing people. Albert Works is the most famous, but then the people who founded Looney Tunes were ex-Disney people who were fed up with him and left. And the guy who ran Van Buren Studios, the guy who directed, who's the same person who directed The Three Little Pigs, which is this big Oscar-winning short for Silly Symphonies. So we get to like actually have people wearing like the Mickey Mouse ears, right? And then when they quit, they just take the ears off and become other animals.
That's clever.
So that'll be fun. The squid was just, I first was like, oh, because the other thing Edison was, and you'll see this more as the first issue goes along, Edison, one of the reasons American filmmaking moved out to Hollywood was sure that the more sun was terrific, but Edison would sue anyone who tried to make movies claiming that that they were infringing his patent. So Edison was really the first patent troll.
Oh yeah, totally.
So you would run across the continent just to get away from him and his lawyers, because Edison obviously was based in New Jersey. So that was one way to escape him. So I just was picturing this squid with all these lawsuits and its 8 tentacles. So that'll become clearer later on. And they're deaf. Yeah. And Edison was deaf. That bit you see of the Kickstarter where Blackton, who's a bulldog because he's British, like a lot of these people like don't have famous characters, so we kind of had to pull this out of our butts.
Sure.
That whole sequence where he talks about going to the lab and not being able to, Edison not hearing him and all that stuff, all that comes up from Blackton's first person account.
Yeah.
From the article he did.
Yeah, no, I love the idea. I do have to say though, Walt Disney or Mickey Mouse with Walt Disney's face is like 10% terrifying.
Oh, it's like the cats from the Cats movie.
Exactly. That's totally it. Oh my God. I still haven't seen that. I'm like, it's really weird. I'm like oddly desperate to see that just because it seemed like such a debacle. And I find things like that to be really fascinating. Like,
my wife twice.
She saw, did she
God.
she love it?
First time she was on edibles.
Okay.
Second time she dragged me, we got hammered.
Uh-huh.
On alcohol. And when the cats first emerge in this alley, it's like it's the closest I've ever come to experiencing what Lovecraft described as cosmic body horror. like you don't understand what you're looking at. It's just like insane. I mean, I'll say this about the movie: I was never bored, which is more than I can say for a lot of movies. It's not a good movie.
Right. The
show is not a good show. I don't even particularly like Andrew Lloyd Webber's music, but man, they just bombard you with naked cat people for 2 hours.
Yeah. I mean, like, I remember when it was first coming out, there was all these tweets or like all these people that were like sharing reviews. And it was just every time one came out, I was like a little bit more interested. And by the time it actually came out, and like it came out, I think the same weekend as like The Rise of Skywalker, I was like, maybe we should go see this instead of Rise of Skywalker. I'm like, do we really
I was so pissed. My daughter wanted to go see Star Wars again. And I went to go look for tickets, and it's gone. It's gone from all the theaters, but Cats was still there. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me?
Cats is immortal. They're going to need to do the because they rolled out a new version of it that had completed CGI, which is really kind of a wild thing to say about a movie. It's like,
wait,
we didn't finish it.
They didn't finish the movie?
Well, there was...
oh my God.
I will say this. Cats is way more interesting than Rise of Skywalker.
Oh my God. So
they're both bad movies, but at least in Cats, you have Idris Elba playing a teleporting crime lord whose enforcer is Taylor Swift.
That is the greatest sentence in the history of the English language. That is incredible. I went on this whole spiel after my wife and I went and saw The Rise of Skywalker, where I told her, I was like laying in bed afterwards and she was telling me about her thoughts, and I was reading another really weird Cats review, and I was just laughing hysterically because I realized, I told my wife, I was like, I enjoy like reading reviews about Cats more than I enjoyed a Star Wars movie. How is this the world? It makes no sense. Anyways, Well,
in America.
I want to get on to like the actual Kickstarter and all that stuff because I find the whole idea. I mean, I do a Patreon. Crowdfunding is such an interesting thing because it's both a wonder and a horror at the same time. Because you're like, I can't believe this is happening, and then the entire time where it like things slow down for a bit, and you're like, I don't know how to convince people to do this. It gets weirdly like terrifying. So why you guys have history of self-publishing? You had Comic Book History of Comics was published through IDW. Why did you want to go with Kickstarter on this one?
It was you go ahead, Fred.
I was just going to say the industry is very unsettled right now. There is a flood of content. People talk a lot about the streaming services and how there's just too many TV shows. There's also an incredible proliferation of comic book companies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think those two things are probably related for the obvious reason. So publishers I have found have become extremely conservative over the last year as to what they're going to pick up and what they're going to do. So our stuff is kind of outliers anyway, in terms of the audience. And, we've been basically working since 2014 on this one project that isn't even going to come out until June, Action President.
Mm-hmm.
So we're sort of in this weird well where we kind of have to reprove. Like we've gone away for a while. We've been working the whole time, but on stuff the public hasn't seen. So
I would say the direct market hasn't seen.
Yeah,
that's
so
right. Well, and that's right. And
we're taking it to that arena rather than the publishing arena. But go ahead, Fred. Sorry.
And we're doing kids comics, and even though kids comics are a huge market right now, they don't really overlap with the direct market. So. We kind of wanted to do a proof of concept, and Kickstarter is a great way to talk directly to fans. Frankly, it's a good way to find out who your fans are.
Mm-hmm.
And you just get a lot more control of the process. You see a lot more. The LCS market is becoming much more OGN. Is that for Alphabet Stew?
Yeah.
Being much more OGN oriented, and the floppies, I think, are going through a real crisis period. So, frankly, going back to our roots and seizing back that power by self-publishing, I just think is a smart business move when everything is so uncertain right now. And as we cut up the middlemen and we can just go directly to the fans, then we can say, hey, look, publishers, our Kickstarter was funded 150, 200% or whatever that figure ends up being. And so it becomes a very powerful tool. And we get to offer this cool exclusive hardcover in the digital version that you won't be able to get anywhere else.
Yeah.
That we wouldn't have been able to do that if we'd gone with one of our publishers before. We wouldn't have been able to do a nice big deluxe package. It just would have been a regular comic.
Right. And I mean, I had done a Kickstarter with Crystal in 2014 on this play we did about Jack Kirby, but that was a theater piece, which is sort of a strange thing to crowdfund because it's ephemeral. Like if you're not in Brooklyn to see it, you didn't see it. We couldn't really we send people the book, and later on we did an audio recording, but equity rules, the actor union rules, prevented us from doing a film version. So that wasn't something to offer. So, and I also kind of waited because, as you were saying, David, like crowdfunding takes over your life. Like it's just like, the Kickstarter app is the most addictive thing of all time because it's people giving you're getting notifications that strangers are giving you money. So it's like, did more strangers give me money?
Yeah.
Give me more money, strangers. You're like, God damn it, phone, tell me more money. There's more money. So
no, I read it as it's strangers that love you.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and I imagine like you guys have been working together for what, like, publishing wise, like for 17 years now. And so you've built,
we're so
you've built up an audience and like, that's like the perfect place to be when you're crowdfunding is because when that you're going to have like, not to get so pragmatic about it, but you're going to have kind of a floor. It's like, you're going to be able to get to like kind of a certain point, and there's like a safety there. And like, you have that floor, but then you also have a ceiling, like represented by your stretch goals, which is like getting Adam Gazowski to color it, going to Japan so you can go to the Studio Ghibli Museum, which I highly recommend. It is fantastic. And their tickets are actual animation cells from the movies, which is amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really cool. I got to keep... What's that?
You've got to like reservations fairly far in advance, right?
I've heard mixed. I got it before I even went, because from what I heard, if you're from outside the country, you have to have tickets beforehand. But I've heard from other people who bought it from an agent when they went. And so I booked ahead of time because I'm of the mind of why not risk it? Just make sure that you're all settled and everything. But yeah, it would definitely be a good idea of booking ahead if you guys do end up doing that. But
I've heard people buy them at 7-Eleven for real.
Oh,
like
maybe.
Yeah, you just walk in to one nearby and like, buy your Ghibli Museum tickets here.
They have the Laputa Castle in the Sky robot on top of,
oh my god,
on top of like the building in like a little like garden that's up there, and it is like the coolest place, because that I don't know if that's like my what the movie I consider the best Studio Ghibli movie, but it is my favorite because I love airships, and that movie's like overdosing on airships.
That's the first one I saw, and it made me a fan right away.
Yeah,
was Laputa.
Nausicaä is still my favorite. Porco Rosso the second.
Oh yeah, those are great too.
Those are great.
One of my daughter's classmates is from Japan.
Is it going to kill the Kickstarter if I just say let's just go anyway?
I went in 2001, and my kids are like so mad that this is before they were born, and they're like, "Oh, we want to go to Japan too." So, and one of my
kids, talk to their friends.
Yeah,
go to Kickstarter. Give me your lunch money.
With Kickstarters though, like the fascinating thing is I mean, this makes sense that these would be important, but creating rewards and the stretch goals, like those are absolutely crucial to the whole process. Like when you guys were developing those, I mean, you one of the things you said, one of like the big items you had to push out there was, instead of throwing Ryan's script in the trash, you're going to give it to someone, which is huge. But I mean, like developing those things, are those things you're even like, are you even trying to develop rewards now to like kind of push it more? Is that something that's an ongoing process throughout?
It is. Yeah. I have to.
In the ass.
We have some, and also making the comic itself. That's really what we're focusing on. But like one of the rewards is a print level, and only one person, who happens to be my brother, is pledged to that one. I guess I'd have to actually show what the prints are going to be before anybody tries to claim those.
And I feel like that's partly why games are so huge on Kickstarter, because they can offer like, well, now our figures are going to be fully painted, and now we have extra cards. There are all these bells and whistles you can add. But a book, let's be honest, is just a book. There's only so many things. We're going to put a little cloth, bookmark in it. Now there's going to be like a dust cover. Like there's only so far you can pimp out a book.
Yeah.
It's still a book. So doing the cake, and I know other people do like, well, now we're going to do stickers, and now we're going to do this, and I guess other people have done like, we're going to give bonuses to the people who work on it and stuff, and so it is kind of hard to. But I feel like I've learned, this being my first Kickstarter in 5 years, and this being my first comics Kickstarter, I feel like I'm learning a lot.
I imagine. I mean, it's like a crash course, right?
Yeah, and like I feel like we should have done. Next time we'll have a slicker, I think, page. Even though I think our page is great, can be even better. I'd sort of plan out our media rollout a bit more, and definitely sit there and try to come up with some flashier stretch goals. Although I think everyone has commented on the go to Japan one, which I think. Oh
yeah, no, I think that's awesome. Well, one wrinkle I think that's really interesting is the fact that. So your process right now is you're going to have that big hardcover at the end when it's all said and done. That's the quote unquote delivery March 2021. But you're also going to have single issues you're going to be delivering as DRM free PDFs, right? Like as they come out. Yeah, it's like
subscription. Yeah.
So I find I feel like I've seen that before, but I don't remember. I don't know. I mean, I just find it really interesting, especially given the fact that. You guys were talking about how like dense the single issue market is. You're sending it out as digital and everything like that. Why was that something you wanted to do? Why was that the angle you decided to go with this?
Well, it's very cost effective because there's no shipping involved.
Right. Yes.
So, but it's the whole book, so you can charge a reasonable amount for it. And I think people understand when they're giving money to Kickstarter, it's not like pure market value. There's a certain degree of I'm helping you out.
Yeah.
Like this isn't just, pure capitalist market economics.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ryan.
But also we wanted to, people would get a reward almost immediately. We'll have the first issue done once the campaign is finished.
That's right.
So that's another thing. It's like, oh yeah, they didn't just take my money and run. And so every, 2-3 months, they'll get another one.
Yeah, exactly.
I would like that if I pledged to a Kickstarter. So why not do that?
As opposed to waiting until the whole book is done.
Yeah.
Getting a PDF. I think the reason people don't do it is because of piracy.
Mm.
And we have kind of unique, at least I'd be correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but I feel like we have a unique view on this, or at least I do, because back in 2011 or 2012 or whenever it was, when we were doing the piracy issue of Comic Book Comics, which is what the Comic Book History of Comics was in single form, until I realized you can't Google that.
Yeah.
Comic Book Comics. Wait, what are you talking about? Like Google just thinks you're nuts. So now actually 10 years later, it's been around long enough that now it does pop. Google has figured it out on its own. They're coming. Skynet, it's coming for us.
Yes.
People freak out about, I'm not going to, I guess, sorry, I'm very rambling and sort of circling this topic. I think that everything is separate markets, right?
Right.
The comic book stores are annoyed at DC for having Walmart comics, the creators are furious when people come up to them at conventions and say, I love your book. I get the torrents whenever they come out. So I just feel like these are all different markets, right? So people who are going to pirate books, I've just come to this conclusion. I think it's morally wrong. The only thing I pirate are old, 80s D&D modules. Anymore. I feel like that's fair game. Get off my back,
The writer of that is shaking his fist right now. He's like, son of a bitch. I knew it.
Scary guy is turning in his
died
face.
in 2004.
Okay, you're good then.
But these are all markets, right? The people who buy it from stores buy it from stores. People buy it in Comixology, buy it in Comixology. People are torrent, and the people who do Kickstarter do Kickstarter. And most people, and I certainly am one of them, dabble in every one of those markets.
I just want to say I totally agree with all this, because I think sometimes people look at the bleed over between those markets as much more significant than they actually are. I've had do you know Brian Hibbs, the owner?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I've had him on the
Brian's
podcast.
A big booster artist. He's been awesome.
Yeah, he's great. And one of the things about him is he's been on the podcast several times, and he regularly reminds me that I'm not a normal reader. But I buy single issues. I buy trades. I also I have a stack of books that are to my right that's from Drawn and Quarterly and from First Second and from a number of publishers and everything like that. And so it's I'm kind of buying from all different. Oh, and I also just wrote a feature on Webtoon, and I think Webtoon is the future. And so
Ryan and I are both Webtoon creators.
Oh,
both
really?
veterans of that. Yeah.
Wait, what did you guys do?
I just with my wife called Eat Fighter.
Okay.
Last year, and Ryan did a strip the year before that called Polydiocy.
Did it for 2 years.
Oh, okay.
It was one of the launch ones, and I did it with this guy named Eric Mahoney was the writer.
Nice.
But it was a weekly political comic, and it was right in the beginning of the Trump era, and I burn out on it. I was just I can't do this anymore.
The weekly schedule is kind of brutal.
Yeah,
it was pretty brutal.
Yeah,
because I would get the scripts Tuesday morning, and then have to have a finished webtoon by Wednesday night at midnight.
I didn't do that.
I did that for 2 years.
Still, but I was the letterer on that, and so I was the last guy in the food chain. So that was a little brutal for me.
Yeah, but I mean, I do think that they're a lot more distinct than people really want them to be, because it's like you're saying with the piracy thing, to a certain degree, there's little you can do to fight it, and there's also a little purpose to it, because it's if a person is pirating Comic Book History of Comics, they're probably not going to buy it. It's just not really a thing that's going to happen.
Well, or they're much more likely to buy it. Right?
I don't know if you ever saw this, but Steve Lieber did this interesting thing where 4chan, I think it was 4chan, maybe it was somebody else. They were pirating Whiteout, the comic he did with it was God, what was that book he did with
Jeff Underground?
Yeah, Underground.
Yeah. It was Jeff Parker.
Yeah, it was the Jeff Parker book, and
Steve did that,
yeah, and he did the whole thing where he went on there and was just he was just Steve. He went on there and was super nice to them and was hey, here's a place where you could buy it, and the sales spiked dramatically. And
sure.
And
you know what?
It's
anecdotally, I've tried the exact same tactic, and I've had my comments deleted. So,
interesting.
There you go.
Oh man! Apparently, Steve has got the juice.
He's a nice man. I'm not. I was nice.
Also, there's something to be said for being first. Like
that's true.
That always gives you a big advantage.
Yeah. But one thing I do like about the single issues leading to the collection thing is I've backed a lot of Kickstarters that become vaporware effectively. They just disappear. Sure. And you guys sending out the PDFs is, it's like it's a proof of concept, isn't it, right? Because it's like execution, but it's proof that this exists. Yeah, it's proof of life.
We're actually doing this. You don't have to send us updates about. I have a Kickstarter from a pretty well-known gaming horror guy who will remain nameless. They just vanished. Like we get updates. It's literally been 3 or 4 years over the deadline, and the guy has written and published other clearly more lucrative stuff since then. But it really is a feeling of we pocketed your money, so tough.
Yeah,
we're not giving it back, and Ryan and I don't want to do that.
No,
I feel like I've victimized is a little strong, but I've been on the wrong end of that a bunch of times as somebody who's backed a million Kickstarters. I love Kickstarter, I always have. But I just, it just takes over your life. So it's much more fun to fund Kickstarters than I feel like, if you have the money.
So we want to do more in the future too. I mean, so it's like, how crappy would that be if we took an extra year or just completely disappeared doing this project?
Totally.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And each PDF you get, and the most popular by far, pledge reward is the hardcover. So, easily 4-to-1 ratio hardcovers over the digital subscription. And that's great. But that way, those people know that that every PDF is getting closer and closer to their final reward. So it almost kind of, I don't know. It's
like waiting for Santa Claus to come.
Yeah,
it's on its way.
I think all three of us have had the experience of coming home to a box in front of our house, being like, "Fucking, what's this?" And you go, "Oh, it's a Kickstarter a year and a half ago. It's this comic. Okay, cool. I guess I forgot why I pledged this, but okay, I'll read it."
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is like I'm planning on backing at the hardcover. So just spoiler alert, I'm going. That's going to happen. But the funny thing is like I honestly, I will be happy to get the PDFs in my inbox, but I'll probably wait to read it in the hardcover. And I think that I wouldn't be surprised if that's like a common experience. It's just like, just like you were saying, Fred, about how there's like these distinct audiences. I prefer reading in print. And so It's just how I lean.
Yeah.
Well, last question I want to ask for you guys, and we've talked a little bit about the industry and how it's shifted and everything, but I'm curious, like the Xeric grant is gone. You guys talked about that. That's not a thing anymore. The way you got started with Action Philosophers, and so unless like a giganto grant fell on your laps, you would have to find a way to make something like this happen. How do you feel that Kickstarter and other crowdfunding platforms have like kind of changed the game for comics? Like I know this is like your first one doing it together, but it seems like it really, if you have an audience, if you have somebody that you can kind of push towards something after you guys have worked together for as long as you have, it seems like it can be a godsend. Like what's your view on Kickstarter as a platform in general?
I've always really liked it. This is just, we've wanted to do it for years, and this was just the first time it was the right time.
I was just going to say that I think, on a personal level, you are more so than doing any other artistic project. You're sort of putting yourself out there to fail, publicly.
Yeah.
And I think any time you do any kind of art or performance, that's a possibility. But here you have hard numbers. You know what I mean? So
I've quantified exactly how hard you failed.
Judgment, it's like, oh, this is how much you suck. I have a number value to it, And so it's always very exciting. I think we made 50% within the first 2 hours of the Kickstarter. Yeah. That immediately, like, it was like, oh, thank God. You know what I mean? Like, we'd already cleared that threshold of embarrassment, And so now we're just trying to gin it up and be like, we want to go to Japan, and kind of
really, we just want to get the book colored,
push it up there, and we want to get the book colored, by someone else, and so that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
it's nothing. It's really been nothing other than really gratifying.
It really has been. Yeah, that was the fear was the big thing, I think, holding me back personally. It was just like, yeah, we're gonna fail. It's not gonna work, but it did. So
yeah.
Yay.
I'm doing so. My podcast is entirely funded through Patreon, and I have my comic site Sketched is a membership based one because it's like honestly like I used to be one of the people who ran things over at Multiversity Comics, and I wrote for them for 5 years, and like this is not me complaining. This is just the nature of the way you do things with those types of sites. Is like I never made a single dollar the entire time I worked there. I put money into it, but I never made any money, and so. I like as a person who works in digital advertising, I know that banner ads are just they're a good way to make your site horrible and a bad way to make money. And so I decided to go to the subscription model, but it's like, it's interesting because like, it's hard to not take things like this personally, you know, in a weird way. And like, that's like, I know you guys are kind of, the fascinating thing about Kickstarter is like, if you charted it out, I bet you would have like the first 5 days are just like a hot fire bonanza. And then the next like 15 to 20 days are kind of a lull. And then at the end, you just go back to hot fire bonanza. And it's fascinating how that works. It's like, there's a sense of urgency at the beginning and the end, and that's it. And like, that's such an interesting thing to manage from a mental standpoint.
Well, even in its fact, Kickstarter says the shorter your, campaign, the better. And I think that, I've seen people do 2-week-long campaigns. The 30 days is the standard. But this experience has made me almost think that maybe the next time we do this, we would do a 2-week campaign and sort of get the urgency there even more. I mean, the problem with it is, in getting podcasts, to promote it, you guys only have certain slots available.
Yeah.
Monthly or weekly. And so coordinating that is so you get this sort of rolling people finding out about it. I think that, I've always been a fatalist about marketing. I feel like the whole purpose of marketing is to tell people the product exists and people want to do it or they don't. You make your case and then see what happens. You're not like necessarily seducing people into supporting you. You just got to find your audience. That's the challenge in marketing is connecting audience with product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that's the only reason I kind of like the 30-day window, because you have time to get the word out there and have it matriculate. And Kickstarter has great tools to track this stuff. Like there is literally a graph. You just described the graph. Yeah. I'm looking at it now. It's the exact same thing. Yes, you have a spike straight up and then the kind of rolling hills. Across the. And I also know where all my funding is coming from to a certain degree. Like I know I signed a press release the day of the thing, and I know animationnews.net, which is a news source for shockingly animation, which I found in my 15 minutes of half-assed research I did trying to figure out where I should how I should add to my press list I already had. Add animation. I know 5 people pledged from animationnews.net as they clicked on the Kickstarter link and went and did it.
Mm-hmm.
So people pledged from Newsarama. I know people pledged from Hollywood Reporter. I know people pledged from The Beat. And maybe soon I'll be able to see.
Oh God.
A panel.
Man, I'm nervous. I'm like, oh, now I have my test within the test. This is no fun.
No
You're
pressure.
with us now, David.
And you know how it goes, right? Because it may take people. It's not until the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th time that they see something like, okay, I'm going to pledge to it.
Yeah.
And then like talking about that curve again, like that graph. I mean, it's like the whole thing is often it's not really even about developing interest. It's like developing a sense of urgency. And it's like
that's exactly what Kickstarter's point is.
Yeah, because it's like I'm sure like if you look at like the history of your comics together, it's like you have a lot of readers, but it's like trying to activate that audience and getting that out there is like really the trick. And it's I don't know, it's interesting. It's like sometimes I'll get subscribers or patrons. They're like, I didn't even know you had this. I'm like, I literally say I have it. At the end of every podcast. I mean, I'm not casting aspersions towards listeners or readers or anything like that, but it's just like sometimes you don't know what people do or don't know, and that's almost like one of the biggest hindrances with crowdfunding.
Yeah. Well, it's something you hear. It's like I was one of the last guys to do Conan the Barbarian over at Dark Horse before it moved to Marvel, and so Dark Horse sent me these giant omnibuses that were part of my run, and I had them on my table. And in New York Comic Con, like a fairly large Comic Con, populated largely by pretty savvy comic book fans. I saw you there. as I recall, at our table, David. And I can't tell you how people came up, picked up this giant Conan omnibus, and they're like, they still make these?
Oh my God.
They published Conan, and Conan at the time was like one of Marvel's top selling books because they just gotten it. And it's just like, it just makes me laugh. I had no idea. Iron Man, they still publish Iron Man comics? It's like, geez.
Yeah, you really do have to relentlessly hammer people with awareness.
Yeah.
The things you're doing and that they exist. What I can't tell you how many times I've found out about like friends and colleagues Kickstarters in the last hours of the campaign. Like, oh crap,
Yeah.
pledge. It happens. So
Yeah, it's because like the fluid nature of social media too. It's like people feel you feel nervous and like you're like, oh, should I be doing this when you're like sharing something constantly? But unless the person is in like the right place at the right time on Twitter or on whatever, you're not going to show up.
100%.
yeah, my cousin who used to work at Kickstarter and has run campaigns himself, he's like, you cannot tell people enough that you're doing this thing.
Yeah.
It's like, nobody's going to take their pledge back because you posted, 20 times instead of 10.
I think also there's a psychological phenomenon that even though if the campaign doesn't go, you won't be charged any money. I think there's a reluctance. I think there's a lot of people, and I'm certainly one of them sometimes, depending on the what the product is where you don't want to be the like early adopters are rare, right? So it's once I think you become more attractive at the end of the campaign once you've gone above 100%.
Oh yeah,
that a lot of the data shows that people want to be part of a success.
It's
right?
like the idea that in politics that people who poll better do naturally better because people gravitate towards successes.
Mm-hmm.
And which is like a bizarre thing, but it's just like a lot of people are naturally joiners. And if you show that you're like the cool party to be at, then all of a sudden your party gets a lot bigger. But
exactly, I think that explains a lot of Biden's success.
Yeah,
Super Tuesday.
Yeah,
I think he finally got one success in one state, and then people felt that they could allow themselves to support him.
Yeah.
Well, all right, you guys have all right. Today is Friday, March 6th. So when this goes up, you're going to have, I think, like 16 days left. So everyone who's listening, get on Kickstarter, back the comic book history of animation. Fred, Ryan, I appreciate you taking the time. This has been a great chat, and good luck on the rest of the Kickstarter.
We'll get you some nights in Japan.
Yeah. And thanks for having us on, David. Thanks for giving us the space to talk about this.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with Fred Van Lente and Ryan Dunlavey. You can find them on Twitter at Fred Van Lente and at Ryan Dunlavey, and in their currently being kickstarted series, The Comic Book History of Animation. As a heads up, Off Panel is once again brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out the new version of the site and consider subscribing for access to all of the site's content and its members-only forum. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched. That's SKTCHD. Follow it on Twitter at SketchComic or following me at @SlidesFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Charlie Chu, Greg Peterson, Stefan Hall, Dan Lee, Cameron Schrader, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Mara, Christian Sheldon, Kenny Porter, Chris Pachala, Torrin Grumbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Harry Sayer, Walt's Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Salates, Litwin Studios, Akil Wilson, Nathan House, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Troy Jeffrey Allen, Liana Kangas, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Connor Farner, Vita Ayala, Aditya Bidikar, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil, Kokachi, Phil White, Sean Panillo, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Xavier Files, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Ira James Udaskin, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Chipper, Carl McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Greg Rucka, Adam Heifel, Fiona Staples, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.